Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Kanya, your host, and tonight I'm going to be talking about how this could be the last chance for you and I to get prepared for this brave new world that we're heading into, and how we can capitalize on this massive shift and essentially create a better future for ourselves and for our families. So, without further ado, let's dive in. And I want to start off with uh, an investor that I highly admire and that I recommend you all to look into his work, read his book on changing world order. You can also watch his video here on YouTube as well. This is a short version of essentially a long and deep dive into the power shift that the world went through 500 years 500 years ago. So I'm gonna go over this video here. Well, sorry, I'll narrate on this video in between, so that way it helps me understand a bit more, and also it could help you understand where we are today and how what happened 500 years ago is eerily similar to what's happening today, but of course with a little bit of a innovative touch to it. So here's the video that I'm about to show. Just a note, the video is a bit longer. It is about 5 minutes, so I actually probably will hold back on narrating in between the video. So just gonna let this video play out, get you a better understanding of the previous cycle in essentially market dominance, world dominance, so that way we can get a better understanding of essentially where this video is going. So without further ado, let's play the video from Ray Dalio.
I studied the 10 most powerful empires over the last 500 years and the last 3 reserve currencies. It took me through the rise and decline of the Dutch Empire and the guilder, the British Empire and the pound, the rise and early decline in the United States Empire and the dollar, and the decline and rise of the Chinese Empire and its currencies, as well as the rise and decline of the Spanish, German, French, Indian, Japanese, Russian, and Ottoman empires, along with their significant conflicts, as measured in this chart. To understand China's patterns better, I also studied the rise and fall of Chinese dynasties and their monies back to the year 600. Because looking at all these measures at once can be confusing, I'll focus on the 4 most important ones: the Dutch, British, US, and Chinese. You'll quickly notice the pattern. Now let's simplify the form a bit. As you can see, they transpired in overlapping cycles that lasted about 250 years, with 10 to 20-year transition periods between them. Typically, these transitions have been periods of great conflict because leading powers don't decline without a fight. So how am I measuring an empire's power? In this study, I used 8 metrics. Each country's measure of total power is derived by averaging them together. They are education, inventiveness and technology development, competitiveness in global markets, economic output, share of world trade, military strength, the power of their financial center for capital markets, and the strength of their currency as a reserve currency. Because these powers are measurable, we can see how strong each country is now, was in the past, and whether they're rising or declining. By examining the sequences from many countries, we can see how a typical cycle transpires. And because the wiggles can be confusing, we can simplify it a bit to focus on the pattern of cause-effect relationships that drive the rise and decline of a typical empire. As you can see, better education typically leads to increased innovation and technology development, and with a lag, the establishment of the currency as a reserve currency. You can also see that these forces then declined in a similar order, reinforcing each other's decline. Let's now look at the typical sequence of events going on inside a country that produces these rises and declines. In a nutshell, the big cycle typically begins after a major conflict, often a war, establishes the new leading power and the new world order. Because no one wants to challenge this power, a period of peace and prosperity typically follows. As people get used to this peace and prosperity, they increasingly bet on it continuing. They borrow money to do that, which eventually leads to a financial bubble. The empire's share of trade grows, and when most transactions are conducted in its currency, it becomes a reserve currency, which leads to even more borrowing. At the same time, this increased prosperity distributes wealth unevenly, so the wealth gap typically grows between the rich haves and the poor have-nots. Eventually, the financial bubble bursts, which leads to the printing of money and increased internal conflict between the rich and the poor, which leads to some form of revolution to redistribute wealth. This can happen peacefully or as a civil war. While the empire struggles with this internal conflict, its power diminishes relative to external rival powers on the rise. When a new rising power gets strong enough to compete with the dominant power that is having domestic breakdowns, external conflicts, most typically wars, take place. Out of these internal and external wars come new winners and losers. Then the winners get together to create the new world order, and the cycle begins again.
Now, I want to comment on a few things regarding towards the end of that video, where it talks about there'll be a new powerhouse, there'll be a new reserve currency because, let's say, China overtakes U.S. as the global economic powerhouse. Now, with the introduction of the distributed ledger technology, which is technology around the blockchain and crypto space, and by the way, a lot of private global institutions have been developing and have been talking and have been making moves around this technology with fintech companies, with other private entities at a global and at a massive scale. Like from the IMF to the Bank of International Settlements to the World Economic Forum and so forth, collaborating with Ripple, Zenfin, Hedera, who else? Stellar, Algorand, and so forth. There's so many more. With the introduction of this technology, we might not even need to see a reserve currency. Because you see, what do you think, based on the repeated cycle of power shift after power shift after power shift, you think suddenly, I don't know, let's say India, so let's say China beats America, and let's say India, Saudi Arabia, and who else? Could be South Africa, let's just say that. Do you think they could trust China? Do you think they would trust China enough so that they could essentially say, "Oh, hail the Chinese yuan," and let the yuan be the reserve currency? Now, based on innovation and education and and if China is developing in a consistent and in a very impressive scale, at a very impressive scale, then maybe that could happen. But why take the risk when you have a distributed ledger technology that is decentralized? So you build a blockchain that's decentralized, that scales at a global rate, and could handle transactions, trillions of dollars, in seconds, and for pennies. When you have such a system, do you really need a reserve currency? Because you can just exchange your Chinese yuan to American dollar within seconds, for pennies. You don't need to hold a reserve of the Chinese yuan, so that essentially that's to say, yeah, you need to hold this currency because we're the dominant powerhouse now, and so it's a centralized. It becomes just a repeat of the same thing, centralized entity that controls everything, that controls how the economy works when you have a distributed ledger technology. Yes, private institutions will have some say, or at least more say, within the economy than even central banks, or I mean, central bank is technically a private entity, but I'm talking about large elite institutions like the World Economic Forum, IMF, the Bank of International Settlements, which is the central bank of central banks. If they have the most say in this kind of technology, then they could be the ones who have the most say. And let's be honest, it's mostly the private institutions that do have the most say, that do have a strong grip in an economy, in the world economy in general. Like BlackRock has $12 trillion of management, $12 trillion worth of asset within its fund, in its they manage over $12 trillion, right? To sum it up, excuse me. That's already, I think, that already beats Chinese. It does. I think it does. I'm not sure. You have to fact check me on that. But yeah, that's already beats the entire GDP of China and India and Russia and so forth. So, if you have that bridge currency, right? If you have that bridge around a DLT, distributed ledger technology, DLT is short, then you don't need the reserve currency, and so you have a level playing field. That's not to say that everybody's gonna be equal and you're all gonna live happily ever after, and there'll be no more fighting. There'll still be countries with better innovations and better networks and so forth, and better education systems, etc. So they can measure power based on that. But with a distributed ledger technology that's decentralized, every country can compete with trade freely, without permission, no sanctions and so forth, just freely compete with each other, and they all pay pennies and they all settle within seconds. Now, for this to happen, we can't operate on a fiat kind of environment anymore, where it's paper money essentially. So they're gonna look to either create a stable coin or digitize the fiat somehow in the form of a CBDC. Now, CBDCs, yes, it's got a lot of bad tractions in its name, but how I could see this happen is a CBDC gets implemented everywhere, and so this is, by the way, digital money now essentially would become infinite money, and it's programmable money, right? Because you're no longer relying on printing. You just can mint it. You could just create money out of thin air. You don't need to cut down trees or whatever to do it. So you really can create money out of thin air. And how I see this can work is you have a CBDC, let's say in the form of a New Zealand CBDC, NZ CBDC, whatever they call it. And because it's programmable and so forth, that might not sound very good, but either it could be backed by a physical commodity like gold, silver, something. Either the whole world decide to do that, or each country decides to back its currency to each different commodity. We could do that, or we don't even need to back it by something, and we just have it as it is, a CBDC. But this time, because of instant settlement, because of information already flows in within the speed of light, and now that there's innovation around faster settlements, cheaper settlements, and then of course with the developments of AI, innovation could be freely explored in any way possible. Meaning there could always be something new that comes out every day, every week, etc. Keeps the world running. And with the developments of metaverse and gaming and so forth, and by the way, a lot of money is being poured within these industries, gaming, metaverse, etc. Rosa Rios, the 43rd Treasurer of the United States, confirmed this as well. where she said if she was an investor, she'd follow the money, and the money is going to AI, blockchain, metaverse. Metaverse, course, clearly it's more about gaming and virtual reality and so forth. So we might not need to see it backed by anything. We might not need a reserve currency, and we essentially just rely on innovation and education and in the essentially a digitized economy. Could it be a dystopian future? Sure, it could be, but it could also be a very long-lasting and peaceful future for us humans as well. So it's easy to cut to the chase with what the CBD can do and how evil it is, but you kind of had to zoom out and just try to see a good side of it, because there's always a good side of it. There's no just full-on negative impacts on the people and so forth. When you try to do the good things, somebody's always going to be offended. When you try to do the bad things, somebody's always going to be like, oh yeah, I agree with that. So don't be too one-sided. Do your research in this space, guys. Pay attention. You need to pay attention, because if you don't, then you're going to miss out on the greatest transfer of wealth, information, innovation of all time. And personally, I think one of the best ways to capitalize on these big changes, on these big cycles essentially in the global markets, is to invest in the underlying infrastructure. So that's why I research a lot around Ripple, around Zinfin, around Stellar, these fintech companies that are talking and are making big moves with massive financial institutions, massive private global economic institutions like IMF, like the Bank of International Settlements, and and central banks, of course. So honestly, that's one of the best ways to capitalize on this transformation of wealth. And again, this would certainly, if it does play out, and if these companies do turn out to be a big part of this new financial system, which I personally think it will, I think Ripple will be, and Zinfin will be a part of this new financial system, then your future, your kids' future, your kids' kids' future will be so bright. It will look so bright because you've done your research and you've invested correctly into these companies and into the technologies that are being used, that are being developed on to make this new financial system. So with that being said, I've gone on long enough, and I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you found it informative, and yeah, my next video, I'm going to be talking more about the other opportunities that I'm looking at, which is around Hedera, HBAR, Zinfin, and so forth. So I'll slide away from Ripple for a little bit and XRP, because I think I've been talking about this consistently for a while now. So don't forget to like and subscribe, and share the video far and wide, so that way you can get your family in, you can get your friends in to essentially start paying attention and do what needs to be done. Otherwise, let's just say you may miss out on the greatest transfer of wealth of all time. So have a good night, and I'll see you in the next video. Ciao.